The Galactic Council chamber was filled with representatives from 47 different species when Ambassador Gregory Walsh walked in with his team. The human delegation consisted of 5 people who had spent years trying to make Earth matter in the eyes of alien civilizations that had been exploring space for thousands of years. Gregory was a man in his late 50s, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many rejections. Beside him sat Linda Hayes, a sharp woman who handled most of the diplomatic paperwork. Alex Turner was their security expert, a former military man who rarely smiled. Sophie Martinez knew more about alien biology than most humans alive. Benjamin Clark understood economics better than he understood people. Together, they represented humanity's best attempt at belonging to something greater than themselves. The council meeting started like it always did. Species argued about trade routes and territory disputes. Some complained about resource allocation, while others demanded more representation on various committees. The humans sat quietly and listened because that was what junior members did. They had learned over 3 decades that speaking up too often made the older species annoyed. Earth had been part of the council for 32 years, but those years felt like being the youngest child at a table full of adults who barely remembered you were there. Then the topic of pirate raids came up. A species called the Krillians had lost 14 ships in the past month. Their representative, an insect-like being named Chxt, clicked his mandibles in frustration as he described how raiders were attacking merchant vessels and holding entire planets hostage. The Council's peacekeeping fleet was spread too thin across too many systems. Ships arrived too late or not at all. The pirates knew the patrol patterns and attacked the gaps. Gregory raised his hand. Chairman Vortum, a tall reptilian creature whose species founded the Council millennia ago, acknowledged him with barely concealed impatience. Gregory stood and offered humanity's help. Earth had experience fighting enemies who used hit and run tactics. Human military forces had dealt with pirates and insurgents for centuries. They could coordinate with council fleets and share tactical knowledge. Counselor Murena interrupted before Gregory could finish. Her species, the Plenari, were known for their beautiful voices and their absolute certainty that they knew best about everything. She thanked Gregory for his enthusiasm but explained that the council had protocols. Human forces lacked experience with interstellar combat. The older species would handle this matter, as they always had. Her tone made it clear the discussion was over. Gregory sat down slowly. Linda touched his shoulder briefly. This was not new. This happened every time humans tried to contribute something meaningful. The pattern had repeated itself so many times that the delegation had started keeping count. The meeting continued. Another crisis emerged when they discussed the Drellic plague that was killing millions on agricultural worlds across several systems. The disease was spreading faster than anyone expected. Sophie Martinez stood up and explained that Earth had extensive experience with pandemics. Human medical research had developed protocols for rapid response and containment. She offered to share those protocols and send medical teams to help. Again, the offer was acknowledged and dismissed. The Pelthani healer case assured everyone that they had matters under control. They had been healing the galaxy's sick for thousands of years. They did not need help from a species that had barely left its own solar system a century ago. Sophie sat down and said nothing, but her hands were clenched under the table. By the time the session ended, the human delegation had offered help 3 times and been politely refused 3 times. They gathered their materials and walked back to their embassy in silence. The human embassy was small compared to the massive structures that housed the delegations of older species. It felt appropriate somehow. Everything about humanity's presence in the council felt small and temporary. In their conference room, the 5 humans sat around a table and finally spoke freely. Alex Turner was the first to break the silence. He pointed out that they had been doing this for 3 decades. 32 years of being patted on the head and told to sit quietly while the adults handled important matters. 32 years of watching problems get worse while their offers of help were ignored. Linda pulled up statistics on her tablet. The numbers told a story that was hard to argue with. Humanity contributed significant resources to the Council budget, but received almost nothing in return. Trade agreements consistently favored older species. When humans developed new technologies or techniques, the Council called it knowledge sharing and took what they wanted without compensation. The relationship was completely one-sided. Benjamin added his economic analysis. Earth was losing money and gaining nothing except the privilege of being ignored. The Council treated human contributions as tribute rather than investment. There was no path forward where this relationship became balanced or fair. Sophie mentioned something else. She had noticed that when humans offered solutions, some Council members seemed annoyed rather than grateful. It was not just dismissal. There was resentment in their responses, as if humanity demonstrating competence was somehow offensive to the natural order of things. Gregory stood and walked to the window. Outside, thousands of beings from dozens of species moved through the station corridors. Earth had fought so hard to be part of this community. Humanity had dreamed of taking its place among the stars, of contributing to galactic civilization, of mattering on a cosmic scale. Instead, they had found a hierarchy that had no room for newcomers who wanted to be treated as equals. He asked his team what they should do. Continue banging their heads against this wall for another 30 years? Keep offering help that would never be accepted? Wait for the Council to decide humans had earned the right to be taken seriously? No one had a good answer. They were diplomats, not warriors. They had been sent to build bridges, not burn them. But after 3 decades of trying, the bridges led nowhere. They were decorative structures that looked good, but served no real purpose. Gregory made a decision. They would compile everything they had experienced and observed. Every rejected offer. Every dismissive response. Every example of humans being treated as less than equal partners. They would send a comprehensive report back to Earth and let the Unity Assembly decide what came next. The 5 humans worked through the night preparing that report. They documented patterns of systematic marginalization. They showed how human resources went into Council projects but human voices were excluded from decisions. They demonstrated that the relationship was not just unequal, but deliberately structured to keep humanity in a subordinate position. The report was finished by morning. Gregory sent it through encrypted channels back to Earth. Then, they waited. On Earth, government officials read the report in growing anger and frustration. Representatives from every nation on the planet gathered to discuss what it meant. They had united humanity under a single banner for interstellar affairs, believing that joining the Galactic Council would elevate Earth's position in the universe. Instead, their people had spent 3 decades being treated like children who should be grateful for being allowed in the room. Debate raged in assembly halls across the planet. Some argued for patience. Change took time, and perhaps another few decades would shift perceptions. Others demanded immediate withdrawal. Why should humanity remain in an organization that clearly did not value them? A third option emerged from those discussions. It was radical and risky, but it appealed to a growing number of representatives. Humanity would not rage against the Council or demand changes. Instead, Earth would simply step back. They would withdraw their active participation while technically remaining members. No more volunteering resources or expertise. No more offers of assistance. No more eagerly trying to prove themselves worthy of respect. The Council wanted to handle galactic affairs without human interference. Fine. Humanity would give them exactly what they seemed to want. Silence. The proposal was debated for weeks. Some worried it would burn bridges permanently. Others argued that bridges leading nowhere were not worth maintaining. Eventually, a vote was taken. The Unity Assembly approved the withdrawal by a narrow margin. Instructions were sent back to the delegation. Gregory Walsh read them carefully, then called his team together. He told them what Earth had decided. They would return to the Council one final time to deliver a message. After that, they would close the embassy and come home. The 5 humans sat together in silence, processing what was about to happen. They had given years of their lives to this mission. They had believed in the dream of humanity, finding its place among the stars. Now they would be the ones to officially end that dream, or at least this version of it. Gregory looked at each of them. Linda, Alex, Sophie, Benjamin. They were friends who had shared frustration and disappointment and rare moments of small victories that never led anywhere. Tomorrow, they would walk into the council chamber and change everything. None of them knew it yet. But their next speech would echo across the galaxy. The words they were about to speak would force civilizations older than human recorded history to question everything they thought they knew about power and partnership. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Humanity was about to prove that lesson to species who had forgotten it was possible. The council chamber was unusually full when Gregory Walsh walked to the speaking platform. Word had spread that the human delegation requested emergency speaking time, and curiosity drew representatives from species who normally skipped routine sessions. The 5 humans stood together, their expressions carefully neutral, as Gregory prepared to deliver the message that would change everything. Chairman Vordum called the session to order and recognized Ambassador Walsh. Gregory looked out at the assembled representatives, beings from worlds humanity had dreamed of meeting for centuries, and felt nothing but tired relief that this performance was finally ending. He read the prepared statement clearly and without emotion. Effective immediately. Humanity was withdrawing from active participation in the Galactic Council. Earth would maintain technical membership and fulfill basic treaty obligations, but nothing more. No volunteering resources, no offering expertise, no proposing initiatives. Human vessels would avoid council space except when necessary. Humanity was stepping back from a relationship that had never been reciprocal. The translation devices struggled to keep up with the sudden explosion of voices. Dozens of species tried to speak at once, their sounds blending into incomprehensible noise. Chairman Vordum raised his clawed hand and demanded silence. When the chamber finally quieted, he asked Gregory to clarify whether this was a resignation. Gregory explained that it was not. Earth would remain a council member on paper, but humans would no longer actively participate. They would not volunteer, would not offer assistance, would not try to contribute beyond minimum legal requirements. Humanity was acknowledging reality and adjusting accordingly. Counselor Mirena stood, her melodic voice carrying confusion and something that might have been offense. She called this an extreme reaction to minor diplomatic friction. What had prompted such a dramatic decision? Linda Hayes stood to answer. She detailed 3 decades of systematic dismissal. Every offer of help refused, every contribution devalued, every attempt at meaningful partnership rejected. This was not a reaction to one incident but the conclusion of years of careful assessment. The Council had made its preferences clear through consistent action. Humanity was simply respecting those preferences. Other counselors tried to argue. They suggested dialogue and negotiation. Alex Turner cut them off. Dialogue had been attempted repeatedly for 3 decades. Good faith had been extended constantly. That faith was never reciprocated. This was not anger, but simple acknowledgement of facts. Sophie Martinez added that humanity was not closing itself off from galactic civilization. Human space remained open to peaceful contact and trade. Earth would continue building relationships with individual species outside council frameworks. But humans would no longer seek validation from an organization that clearly did not value them. Benjamin Clark displayed economic data. The numbers were devastating. Humanity had poured trillions into council coffers over 3 decades, while receiving virtually nothing back. The relationship was financially ruinous and politically humiliating. No rational entity would continue such an arrangement. Chairman Vordum suggested that abandoning galactic unity over economics was short-sighted. Gregory corrected him immediately. This was not abandonment, but withdrawal. Unity required mutual respect and reciprocal benefit. What humanity experienced was neither of those things. They were not obligated to continue a relationship that harmed them. The Krillian representative Chikst brought up the pirate crisis. What about the galaxy's problems that required coordinated response? Would humanity turn its back on those in need? Gregory's expression hardened. Humanity had offered to help with the pirates, and been told their assistance was not needed. They had offered medical expertise for the plague, and been assured the council had matters handled. The humans were not turning their backs. They were simply respecting the council's stated preference to handle problems without them. The chamber erupted again. But Gregory spoke over the noise. He stated clearly that humanity wished the council well. Earth hoped they would prosper. Humans would honor existing treaties and remain available for contact if circumstances changed. But humanity would no longer volunteer to be the eager newcomers who were tolerated while being dismissed. The Unity Assembly had made its decision, and that decision was final. The 5 humans bowed with perfect diplomatic courtesy and walked out of the chamber. Behind them, chaos descended as counselors argued about what had just happened and what it meant. The humans did not look back. They spent the next several weeks closing down the embassy properly. Gregory insisted that everything be done correctly. Every file documented, every piece of council property returned, every legal requirement fulfilled to the letter. If humanity was going to withdraw, they would do it so perfectly that no one could claim they had acted improperly or emotionally. Other ambassadors tried to talk to them during those weeks. Some seemed genuinely confused about what had provoked this reaction. Others appeared concerned about precedent, worried that other species might follow humanity's example. The humans remained polite, but distant. They answered direct questions about logistics, but refused to debate the decision itself. Councillor Threxus observed to Chairman Vortum that the silence was eerie. The humans were not angry or making demands. They were just leaving quietly and efficiently. Vortum agreed that this should concern them more than anger would have. Anger could be negotiated with or waited out. This calm withdrawal was something else entirely. Ambassador Kelthara of the Virenii requested a private meeting with Linda Hayes. The Virenii had been humanity's first contact species, the ones who brought Earth into the council. Kelthara's tendrils moved in patterns of distress as she apologized. Her people should have done more to advocate for humanity. They should have pushed harder against the dismissive treatment. Linda's expression softened slightly. She acknowledged that the Virenii had done what they could within their own political constraints. This was not about blaming individual species. The problem was systemic, built into how the council functioned. Changing that system, from inside, had proven impossible for humanity. Kelthara suggested that reforms were already being discussed. The council was talking about changing allocation formulas and evaluation protocols. Could humanity give them time to implement changes? Linda asked how long those discussions would take. Years? Decades? And how many proposed reforms would actually happen versus being quietly abandoned once the shock wore off? Humanity had spent 3 decades trying to work within the system. That system did not work for them. Now Earth was trying something different. Kelthara argued that isolation was not the answer. Linda corrected her. Humanity was not isolating. They were prioritizing. Earth had its own problems and needs. There were other species humans had encountered independently who wanted genuine partnerships. There was so much of the galaxy left to explore. The Council was one option for humanity's future, but not the only option. The Virenii ambassador's tendrils drooped. She feared the Council would not respond well to this withdrawal. Some members saw it as a challenge or insult, rather than a reasonable business decision. Linda replied that how the Council chose to interpret humanity's actions was their decision. Earth had made its choice based on careful analysis of facts. If the Council wanted to be offended, that was their right, but it did not change anything. The human embassy officially closed 32 days after the announcement. A small maintenance crew would keep the physical building functional as required by treaty, but no diplomats would staff it. The last transport ship departed with Gregory Walsh and his team aboard. Alex Turner stood at an observation window, watching the Council station shrink into the distance. Sophie joined him and asked if he had any regrets. Alex admitted he did. He had believed in what they were trying to build. He thought humanity could be part of something bigger than one planet's concerns. Gregory approached them and said they were still part of something bigger. Just not with the Council. At least not right now. Maybe the Council would change eventually. Or maybe they would continue as they had for millennia. Either way, it was no longer humanity's problem to solve. Sophie asked if he thought the Council would change. Gregory said maybe, eventually, when they faced challenges that their ancient methods could not solve. Or maybe they would adapt and continue without ever missing Earth's presence. Time would tell. The ship jumped to faster than light travel. The Council station disappeared from view, left behind in more ways than one. Ahead lay the long journey back to Earth and an uncertain future for humanity's place in the galaxy. None of them knew that the galaxy was about to test the Council in ways it had not been tested in centuries. None of them could predict that humanity's absence would create gaps that ancient civilizations had no idea how to fill. They only knew that they were going home after years of trying and failing to matter to beings who did not want to value them. Back on the station, Chairman Vortum sat in his office and stared at reports of the human departure. Other species were already asking questions. Why had humanity left? What did it mean for Council stability? Would other dissatisfied species follow their example? Vortum had no good answers. The truth was that humanity's withdrawal had caught the entire Council leadership by surprise. They had dismissed the humans so consistently and for so long that the possibility of those humans simply leaving had never seriously been considered. Species did not leave the Council. They competed for membership, fought for recognition, did everything possible to gain status within the hierarchy. The humans had just walked away, as if membership meant nothing, as if the Council's approval meant nothing, as if being part of the galaxy's most ancient and powerful political body was less important than maintaining self-respect. It was unprecedented. And it made Vortum deeply uneasy, in ways he could not quite articulate. The humans had been easy to dismiss when they were eagerly seeking Council approval. Now that they had stopped caring about that approval, they became something else entirely. Something that did not fit into the categories the Council used to understand and manage member species. Change was coming, though Vortum did not yet realize how profound that change would be. The humans had withdrawn in silence. But that silence would soon become deafening as its consequences rippled across the galaxy. 6 months passed after humanity withdrew from active Council participation. The Galactic Council continued its business with determined normalcy. Several members seemed relieved that the pushy humans were gone. The ancient rhythms of galactic governance resumed without the disruption of newcomers who did not understand their place. Everything appeared to be returning to how it should be. The pirate problem worsened first. Raids in Sector 7 intensified, despite Council military responses. The raiders grew bolder, striking deeper into protected space and holding entire planets hostage. 3 agricultural worlds were blockaded, their populations starving while pirates demanded ransoms. The Council's peacekeeping fleet spread itself across dozens of systems, but could not respond effectively anywhere. Admiral Krenthis stood before an emergency Council session, his forearms gesturing in frustration. The raiders had changed tactics, he explained. They used asymmetric warfare now, hitting supply lines and avoiding direct battle. They exploited gaps in patrol routes and struck where defenses were weakest. Traditional military protocols designed for conventional warfare between established powers were failing against these unconventional enemies. Chairman Vortum demanded that Krenthis develop new protocols. The Admiral had the military expertise of 47 species at his disposal. Surely that was sufficient to handle raiders. Krenthis hesitated before answering. Some member species might have had relevant experience with asymmetric threats, he suggested carefully. Experience the Council no longer had access to. Everyone knew he meant the humans. An uncomfortable silence filled the chamber. No one wanted to acknowledge that the departed species might have been useful. Councillor Mirena broke the silence by ordering Krenthis to find another solution. The Admiral left without another word. The second crisis emerged simultaneously on agricultural worlds across the Cylon Confederacy. The Drellic Plague, which the Pelthani healer caste had assured everyone was under control, had mutated. The new strain spread faster and resisted all existing treatments. Death tolls climbed from millions into tens of millions. Entire colonies faced extinction. High Healer Prenth contacted the council via hologram. Her bioluminescent skin flickered erratically, a sign of extreme stress among her people. She admitted that the plague had exceeded their capacity to contain it. The Pelthani needed help desperately. They needed species with experience in rapid pandemic response, with adaptable research methods, with fresh perspectives on medical problems. Counselor Threxus asked what specific resources Prenth required. The High Healer started listing needs before stopping herself. She needed species that could adapt quickly to unprecedented situations, species that had dealt with evolving diseases, species like the humans who had offered help 6 months ago. Another uncomfortable silence descended. The Pelthani healer caste had been revered across the galaxy for millennia. If they were admitting helplessness, the situation was catastrophic. Counselor Mirena suggested that surely the Pelthani could develop solutions given their vast experience. Prenth replied quietly that they had never faced anything like this mutated strain. They needed different approaches, new methodologies, perspectives from species who thought about medicine differently. The council authorized emergency funding and assembled a multi-species medical task force. Progress was painfully slow. Each species had its own medical philosophy and research approach. Finding consensus took weeks of debate while people died by thousands every day. The task force spent more time arguing about methodologies than actually researching treatments. Economic problems emerged as the third crisis. Benjamin Clark had been correct in his analysis. Humanity had been a net contributor to the council economy. But more importantly, human trade routes and commercial activity had connected various sectors in ways that were only now becoming apparent. Human merchants had operated marginally profitable or even unprofitable routes because they were building relationships and establishing presence. Human financial institutions had provided services that other species found too risky or tedious. With humanity withdrawn, gaps appeared in the economic network. Trade between certain sectors slowed significantly. Financial services became less accessible for smaller species. The Krillian merchant fleets, which had relied on human logistics support, found their operations becoming increasingly inefficient and expensive. Council Economic Advisor Thelax assured leadership that markets would adjust. Other species would fill the gaps humanity left. But 6 months passed, and the gaps remained. Established species saw no reason to change comfortable patterns. They had their profitable routes and established customers. Operating in the spaces humans had occupied would require effort and risk with unclear benefit. Why bother? Chairman Vortum called a private meeting with his inner circle, the dozen counselors representing the most powerful species. They gathered away from official recording devices to speak freely. Vortum stated bluntly that they needed to discuss the human situation. Counselor Mirena asked what situation existed. Humanity had withdrawn, and the council continued. What needed discussion? Threxus responded with facts. Military forces struggled with pirates. The plague spread unchecked. Economic indicators declined. These were measurable problems that coincided with humanity's absence. Mirena argued that these were coincidental problems. Pirates had existed before humanity withdrew. So had the plague. Economic fluctuations were natural. Connecting these issues to one species' departure was irrational. Ambassador Kelthara had reviewed records carefully. She detailed how humans had offered assistance with pirate interdiction 17 times over 3 decades. They proposed specific tactics and methodologies, all refused. They offered pandemic response protocols 12 times, always dismissed. They suggested economic development programs 23 times, all rejected as unnecessary. Admiral Krenthis spoke bluntly. What judgment should the council make now that their established methods were failing? Now that challenges exceeded their traditional capabilities? Mirena understood the implication and rejected it. Asking humans to return would be admitting error. It would undermine council authority and make other species question leadership judgment. Vortum asked what alternative existed. Continue watching people die from plague? Let raiders terrorize trade routes? Allow economic decline? Would that not also undermine council authority? The argument went in circles for hours. Some counselors wanted to reach out to humanity and acknowledge mistakes. Others insisted that would show weakness and threaten the hierarchical structure that had maintained galactic stability for millennia. They reached a compromise that satisfied no one. The Council would not formally contact humanity, but would leave communication channels open. If humans chose to offer help, the Council would consider it. Meanwhile, they would continue addressing crises using their own resources, while quietly hoping Earth might notice their struggles. It was a policy of prideful waiting that would prove disastrous. On Earth, humanity watched. Intelligence services provided regular reports about Council problems. The Unity Assembly debated whether humanity had moral obligations to help despite past treatment. Gregory Walsh testified before the Assembly with his former team beside him. The question was not whether humanity could help, Gregory explained. Obviously, they could. The question was whether they should, and under what terms. For 32 years, humans offered help freely and were rejected. They offered partnership and were treated as subordinates. Now, the Council faced consequences of its own decisions. Some Assembly members suggested rushing back to help as if nothing had happened. Linda Hayes pointed out that people were dying 6 months ago, too. The plague was already spreading then. Pirates were already raiding. The Council had assured humanity that they had matters handled and that human help was not needed. Should Earth assume the Council was lying then or lying now? Another Assembly member suggested humanity could be the bigger party and offer assistance regardless. Alex Turner responded that this was not about being bigger or smaller. This was about establishing patterns for humanity's future galactic relationships. If Earth came running every time the Council faced problems they had refused human help with, they would establish themselves as a convenient resource to be used and dismissed. That was not acceptable. The Assembly chair asked what they proposed instead. Gregory answered simply, "Wait and watch. Continue developing their own capabilities. Keep exploring their own sectors. Build relationships with species outside Council frameworks. If the Council decided they wanted humanity as genuine partners rather than convenient helpers, they knew where to find Earth." The Assembly voted narrowly to support this position. Humanity would remain withdrawn, observing, but not intervening. They would stay available, but not eager. Meanwhile, Earth would see what the Council was truly made of when facing challenges that ancient authority and established hierarchy could not solve. Back at the Council station, problems continued mounting. The pirates attacked 4 more systems. The plague spread to the Pelthani homeworld itself. Economic confidence eroded as trade slowed, and financial services became scarce. Species that had been marginalized under the old hierarchy began questioning why they remained in an organization that served them poorly. Chairman Vortum sat alone in his office late one night, reviewing reports that all carried bad news. The humans had been so easy to dismiss when they were eagerly seeking approval. They had seemed like naive newcomers who did not understand how galactic civilization worked. Now, Vortum wondered if perhaps the humans had understood perfectly. Maybe they had simply decided that how the Council worked was not acceptable. That thought kept him awake long into the night. If the humans were right, if the Council's ancient methods were no longer sufficient for the galaxy's challenges, then what did that mean for everything Vortum had spent his life building and maintaining? What did it mean for the hierarchy that had kept peace for millennia? He had no good answers. And outside his window, the station's lights flickered as another trade convoy reported pirate attacks, and another world confirmed new plague cases. The silence humanity left behind was growing louder every day. 8 months after humanity withdrew, the Galactic Council faced its worst crisis in living memory. High Healer Prenth's hologram appeared in the Council chamber, with news that sent shockwaves through every species present. The mutated plague had reached the Pelthani homeworld. Every Pelthani colony was infected. Their entire civilization faced potential extinction within 3 standard months. The chamber fell completely silent. The Pelthani were a founding council species, their healing arts legendary across the galaxy for thousands of years. If they admitted helplessness, if they faced extinction, then the situation had moved beyond crisis into catastrophe. Counselor Threxus asked what the Pelthani needed. Prenth's answer was painfully honest. They needed what they had needed 8 months ago. Fresh perspectives, different methodologies, species who approached medicine from angles the Pelthani had never considered. They needed the humans. Chairman Vortum promised that every council resource would be mobilized. Every species would contribute their best medical minds. The Pelthani would not face this alone. Admiral Krenthis interrupted before Vortum could finish. With respect, the multi-species approach had been tried for 8 months. The task force made minimal progress because different species could not agree on basic approaches. Meanwhile, pirates had blockaded 4 star systems, and council fleets still could not coordinate effective responses. Counselor Morena demanded to know if Krenthis was suggesting the combined military and medical might of 47 species could not handle raiders and disease. The admiral replied with a single word. Yes, they were failing on multiple fronts because they were too invested in established methods to adapt quickly enough. Vortum started to say they would innovate and adapt, but Ambassador Kelthara interrupted him. Everyone in the chamber knew what Vortum had been about to avoid saying. They needed to ask humans for help. That was the obvious solution that pride kept pushing aside. The chamber erupted. Half the counselors shouted support, while the other half condemned the suggestion as humiliating. The debate lasted 3 days, an unprecedented length for council proceedings. Conservative members argued that inviting humans back would undermine council authority and destabilize the political hierarchy. Progressive members countered that maintaining pride while civilizations died was insane. Chairman Vortum finally made a decision. He would send a private message to Earth, not an official council communication, but a personal inquiry. He would acknowledge that perhaps the council had been hasty in dismissing human contributions. He would ask if humanity might be interested in resuming a more active role. The message was carefully crafted to avoid anything resembling an apology or admission of error. It was diplomatic language at its finest, saying much while committing to nothing. Vortum sent it and waited. Gregory Walsh received the message at Unity Assembly headquarters in Geneva. He read it 3 times before forwarding it to Linda, Alex, Sophie, and Benjamin. The 5 former ambassadors met in person to review it together. They gathered in a secure room and analyzed every word. Sophie observed that it was something, acknowledgement of sorts, even if vague. Alex called it a toe in the water, testing whether humanity would jump at any opportunity to re-engage without the council actually admitting mistakes. Linda asked the hard question. Did it matter? People were dying. The Pelthani faced extinction. Should humanity really watch entire civilizations collapse because of pride? Gregory agreed that they should not. But returning to the old dynamic was equally unacceptable. If Earth responded with eager cooperation, they would establish that humans would accept being treated as conveniences. The next 50 years of galactic relations depended on how they handled this moment. Benjamin showed data about the alternative relationships Earth had built over 8 months. Humanity had established trade partnerships with 6 non-council species. They had started joint research programs with 2 others. Earth had created the beginning of a different framework for galactic engagement that did not depend on council approval. Sophie asked if they were really suggesting they ignore the council entirely and let the plague continue. Benjamin clarified that they should respond, but on human terms, offer help directly to affected species, bypassing council bureaucracy. Work with the Pelthani as equals, not through council frameworks. Establish bilateral relationships based on genuine partnership instead of subordinate membership. They debated for hours before reaching consensus. Earth would offer direct assistance to the Pelthani homeworld without involving council structures. Human medical teams would collaborate with Pelthani healers as partners sharing knowledge equally. Similarly, humanity would help individual species facing pirate threats through bilateral security agreements, not council military command. The response Earth sent to Chairman Vordum was polite and absolutely clear. Humanity expressed concern for suffering populations and offered direct help to affected species. However, Earth would not rejoin council frameworks. The council model, where elder species dictated terms while junior members obeyed, was not something humanity would accept. If the council wanted to work with Earth, it would need to be as equals in genuine partnership. The response hit the council like a physical blow. Councillor Mirena called it unacceptable, claiming humanity was undermining council authority. Kelthara countered that humans were offering help desperately needed. Did structure matter more than lives? Vortum said heavily that yes, it mattered. Accepting humanity's terms meant accepting that the council framework could be bypassed when convenient. Other species would see this and question why they should remain in a system that did not serve their interests. The ancient hierarchy that maintained galactic order would collapse. Threxus spoke quietly. Maybe it should collapse. Maybe they should question whether the Council's traditional structure still served the galaxy's needs. Perhaps humanity was right that the old ways no longer worked. The debate reached new intensity, but events were moving beyond Council control. The Pelthani homeworld sent its own message directly to Earth, accepting humanity's offer without waiting for Council approval. Within 48 hours, human medical ships departed for Pelthani space. 3 other species facing pirate attacks also contacted Earth directly, requesting security assistance through bilateral agreements. Humanity accepted and dispatched ships and advisors. The Council found itself increasingly irrelevant to crises it claimed authority over. Problems were being addressed through frameworks that excluded traditional power structures. Vordum called his inner circle together again. They met in the same secure room where they had argued months earlier. This time, Vordum admitted bluntly that they were losing control. Other species were working directly with humanity and getting faster results than through Council channels. If this pattern continued, the Council would become ceremonial rather than functional. Threxus presented the only alternatives. Fight this trend by trying to force species back into old frameworks, or adapt by fundamentally restructuring how the Council operated. They could try reasserting authority that was slipping away, or they could acknowledge that hierarchical models were failing and build something new. Another counselor asked if Threxus was suggesting they surrender Council authority entirely. Threxus corrected him. Authority that could not adapt was not real authority, just tradition waiting to become irrelevant. The humans had demonstrated that alternative structures were possible and effective. The Council could either participate in building something new or defend something old until it collapsed completely. The meeting ended without agreement, but perspectives were shifting. News of human medical teams making rapid progress with Pelthani healers spread quickly. Reports of successful anti-pirate operations, coordinated through bilateral human agreements, reached the Council daily. More species began questioning why they needed Council frameworks at all. Chairman Vordum sat alone in his office one evening, watching ships come and go from the station. Some were heading toward human space, seeking partnerships outside Council structures. The ancient organization he led was not collapsing dramatically, but slowly becoming irrelevant as species found better options elsewhere. He thought about the humans who had sat quietly in Council sessions for 32 years, offering help that was refused and enduring dismissal without complaint. They had not raged against the Council or tried to tear it down. They had simply walked away and built alternatives. That quiet dignity had been more devastating than any aggressive challenge could have been. Vordum made a decision that night. The Council needed to change fundamentally, not cosmetically. They needed to become something genuinely different, or accept irrelevance. He would propose radical restructuring, transforming the hierarchy into a network of equals. It would be opposed violently by conservative members. But the alternative was watching everything crumble slowly. The next morning, he began drafting a proposal that would reshape galactic governance. Whether it would be accepted remained uncertain, but doing nothing was no longer an option. Humanity had forced the question that could no longer be avoided. Could ancient civilizations adapt to a galaxy that had changed? Or would they cling to traditional authority until it meant nothing at all? The human medical ship Nightingale entered orbit around the Pelthani homeworld to find a planet in crisis. Cities that once glowed with beautiful bioluminescent light now flickered dimly. Quarantine zones spread like shadows across entire continents. Millions were dying while millions more waited in fear. Dr. Peter Graham led the human medical team. He was a tall man with gray hair and the calm manner of someone who had faced pandemics before. His team of 40 specialists arrived with portable labs and medical equipment, but more importantly, they arrived without arrogance or superiority. High Healer Prenth met them personally at the landing site. Her bioluminescent skin barely glowed at all, a sign of exhaustion and stress. She looked at Peter and said simply that they had come. Peter replied that of course they came, and suggested they get to work immediately. The collaboration between human and Pelthani medical professionals became a model for new galactic cooperation. Humans did not present themselves as saviors with all the answers. Instead, they shared their methodologies and research protocols. They explained their experience with pandemic response and rapid adaptation to evolving diseases. The Pelthani contributed their deep understanding of biological systems and sophisticated healing techniques developed over millennia. Working as genuine partners rather than hierarchical specialists, they made rapid progress. Within 3 weeks, they developed a treatment protocol that slowed plague progression. Within 6 weeks, they had a cure. The Pelthani civilization pulled back from the edge of extinction. Similar successes happened with anti-pirate operations. Human tactical advisors did not take command of alien fleets. They shared doctrine on asymmetric warfare and helped coordinate operations between different species forces. They trained local personnel in counterinsurgency techniques. The pirates, who had grown comfortable fighting predictable council responses, found themselves overwhelmed by new approaches. Raiding decreased by 70% within 3 months. Word spread across the galaxy faster than any official announcement could travel. Humanity, the dismissed junior species, was achieving results that the ancient council could not. Species began reconsidering their relationships and assumptions. Chairman Vortum called what would become a historic council session. Every member species sent representatives. The chamber was packed beyond capacity, with observers from dozens of civilizations. Everyone sensed that something fundamental was about to change. Vortum began by acknowledging that the council had stood for millennia, maintaining order and facilitating cooperation across the galaxy. But recent events had forced uncomfortable truths into the open. The council's effectiveness and relevance were in serious question. The chamber remained absolutely silent. Many had expected Vortum to defend traditional authority. This honest acknowledgement of problems was shocking. Vortum continued. Humanity's withdrawal 8 months earlier had seemed like an emotional overreaction at the time. The council believed things would continue as they always had, perhaps slightly inconvenienced, but fundamentally unchanged. They had been completely wrong. The admission rippled through the assembled beings. Chairman Vortum, leader of one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations, was admitting error publicly. Humans did not just leave empty seats in the chamber, Vortum explained. They exposed fundamental flaws in council operations. They revealed that hierarchical structure had become rigid rather than stable. They demonstrated that ancient wisdom had become resistant to necessary change. They proved that longevity was not the same as effectiveness. Counselor Mirena rose to speak. Her voice wavered with something between anger and fear. Was Vortum suggesting they dismantle a council that had maintained peace for thousands of years because one species threw a tantrum? Vortum responded firmly. Humanity did not throw a tantrum. They made a rational decision to withdraw from a relationship that was not serving them. Rather than dismissing them further, the Council should examine why that relationship failed and what it revealed about deeper problems. Ambassador Kelthara stood and requested permission to present her analysis. Over 8 months, she had studied patterns of human engagement before and after withdrawal. Vortum gestured for her to continue. Kelthara displayed detailed data showing that humans approached Council membership with clear expectations. They expected contribution would lead to influence. They expected demonstrating capability would create opportunity. They expected being part of the Council meant genuine partnership in galactic governance. None of those expectations were met, Kelthara continued. Humanity found that regardless of contributions, they remained perpetually junior members. Their offers were declined. Their innovations appropriated. Their voices minimized. The Council treated them as children to tolerate, rather than equals to engage. Another counselor protested that humanity was new and lacked experience. Some proving period was surely reasonable. Kelthara asked, how long was reasonable? 32 years? A century? At what point would humanity have been considered worthy of genuine partnership? Or were they permanently designated as subordinate simply because they arrived late to galactic civilization? The question hung unanswered because the answer was uncomfortable. Many Council members had assumed humanity would remain subordinate indefinitely. That established hierarchy was natural and unchangeable. Kelthara explained that humans did something unexpected when faced with an unfair relationship. They left. They did not rage or attack. They simply walked away and built alternatives. In doing so, they revealed that Council authority rested not on inherent right, but on continued consent of member species. That consent could not be taken for granted. Counselor Threxus stood and stated that transformation required specifics. What exactly was being proposed? Vortum had clearly prepared for this question. He proposed restructuring the Council from hierarchy into a network of equals. No more senior and junior members, only partners with different capabilities. Decision authority should flow from expertise and contribution rather than species age. Resources should be allocated based on need and merit rather than political seniority. Furthermore, Vortum proposed formally inviting humanity to rejoin under these new terms. Not as subordinates, but as founding partners in reconstructed governance. Humanity's withdrawal exposed Council flaws. Their assistance to the Pelthani and others demonstrated their value. It was time to acknowledge both facts. The debate that followed was intense and extended across 3 days. Conservative members argued that radical changes would destabilize everything. Progressive members countered that refusing to change would make the Council irrelevant. Species benefiting from old hierarchy resisted. Species who had felt marginalized supported transformation. Eventually, a vote was called on Vortum's proposal for fundamental restructuring. It passed by a narrow margin, but it passed. The formal invitation sent to Earth was very different from Vortum's earlier private message. This one was explicit and direct. It acknowledged that the Council had failed to recognize humanity's value. It admitted that treatment humanity received was unfair. It proposed specific structural changes and invited Earth to rejoin not as subordinates, but as equals, building new frameworks for cooperation. Gregory Walsh read the invitation with his former team in a meeting room at Unity Assembly headquarters. They analyzed it carefully, looking for hidden conditions or vague language. They found neither. This was a genuine offer. Sophie admitted it was more than they expected. The Council was proposing to actually dismantle its hierarchy. Alex questioned whether they would follow through. Promises were easy, but implementation was hard. Benjamin noted that humanity now had leverage. Alternative relationships existed. Earth did not need the Council anymore, which meant they could negotiate from strength. Linda asked Gregory what he thought. The former ambassador stared at the document for a long moment. He said he believed the Council had learned something important. Maybe not everything, but something significant. Refusing to engage when they were genuinely trying to change would make humanity as rigid as the Council had been. They decided Earth would participate in restructuring discussions as an equal partner. Humanity would consider resuming full Council participation once the new framework was implemented and proven functional. Meanwhile, Earth would maintain alternative partnerships and bilateral relationships, keeping options open while testing Council sincerity. The Unity Assembly debated the response for weeks before approving it. Earth would engage constructively, but carefully, as equals choosing cooperation rather than subordinates accepting terms. Restructuring the Galactic Council took nearly 2 years. It was painful, requiring species that held authority for millennia to share power. Not everyone accepted the changes. Some species withdrew entirely, preferring isolation to operating as equals with formerly junior members. Others embraced new structures enthusiastically. Humanity played a central role in restructuring discussions. Gregory Walsh returned as ambassador, but this time he sat at tables where human perspectives carried real weight. The new council that emerged was flatter and more flexible. Authority flowed from expertise rather than age. Resources were allocated by merit rather than political hierarchy. Species were evaluated on contributions rather than how long they had been members. It was imperfect, but it was better and more equitable and more functional than what existed before. 2 years after withdrawal, Gregory Walsh stood before the restructured council to mark Earth's resumption of full participation. He explained that humanity did not leave because they hated the institution. They left because they believed it could improve, and they knew they could not change it from inside while being dismissed. Sometimes, stepping away gave things room to grow. The council that invited them back was not the council they left, Gregory continued. It was an organization that learned to value diverse perspectives and recognize capability regardless of species age. It operated on genuine partnership principles. This was a council worth joining. Humanity withdrew in silence and left the council to face consequences alone. Those consequences were painful but necessary. They forced difficult conversations and challenged comfortable assumptions. The result was growth that would not have happened otherwise. Chairman Vordum stood to respond. He acknowledged that humanity's withdrawal was perhaps the greatest gift they could have given. Though it felt nothing like a gift at the time, they held up a mirror forcing the council to see itself clearly. What they saw was not flattering, but was necessary. The council was different now. Something new and better. They were grateful that humans had the courage to walk away when that was what the galaxy needed. The chamber filled with sounds of approval from dozens of species. It was genuine unity, born not from comfortable hierarchy, but from painful growth and honest change. That evening, the 5 former ambassadors gathered privately in the reopened human embassy. Alex raised a glass and said they had done it. Linda corrected him. They had done something, and whether it lasted was the real question. Sophie said it would last if they made it last by staying engaged and honest and willing to walk away again if necessary. Gregory agreed. Humanity's real power was not military or economic, but their willingness to leave relationships that did not serve them. That power should never be surrendered. Benjamin showed data proving that bilateral partnerships built during withdrawal remained active alongside council participation. Earth had diversified its galactic engagement, rather than depending on one organization. They sat together in comfortable silence. 5 people who had dedicated years to galactic diplomacy, who faced rejection and made difficult decisions, who walked away and returned to something better. Sophie asked quietly if the council had really changed or if old patterns would eventually return. Gregory said some members genuinely understood what needed to be different. Others were cooperating because they had no choice. That was why vigilance remained necessary, and why maintaining alternatives was crucial. The moment the council treated humanity as subordinate again, they would walk away, as many times as necessary, until the lesson was permanent. Gregory raised his glass. To walking away when necessary, and coming back on our own terms. The others raised their glasses and repeated the toast. Outside, the council station hummed with activity as thousands of beings conducted galactic civilization's business. But now, it operated on partnership principles, rather than hierarchy. The future remained uncertain as it always would be, but now it was being built by partners working together. Humanity had withdrawn in silence, leaving the council alone with consequences of its choices. That silence spoke louder than protests could have. The aftermath was painful, but transformative. The council that emerged was stronger for having been broken and rebuilt properly. Far from the station, on Earth, the Unity Assembly received regular reports on restructuring progress. They watched carefully, ready to recall ambassadors if necessary, but increasingly confident that humanity had found its proper place among the stars. Not as desperate subordinates or grateful juniors, but as equals, partners and builders of better galactic order. It required courage to walk away. It required wisdom to return. It would require constant vigilance to maintain what they had fought to achieve. But humanity had proven they belonged among the stars on their own terms, and that made all the difference.